The fear of psychosis. This is one of the number one fears that I dealt with, that my clients deal with, but it's really the fear of permanence, right? They're afraid that their brain is broken and that they'll never be able to get over this again. And if their brain is broken and they can't heal from this, that leads to overwhelm, and that's a trauma state. And so that fear of permanence becomes one of the layers of stress that keeps them in that state of overwhelm. It's terrifying when the symptoms come back, but it's simply a sign that the root issue is not being dealt with. All right, so I'm going to be reading a story from somebody named Ross, and hopefully this encourages you, this builds hope in you, and this can help spread some awareness. If you would like to submit your story to me, email stories@coachjordanhardgrave.com. There is a specific template that I'm looking for as far as how you structure the email, so make sure to look in the description of this video. All right, let's go and get into this. He says, "Hey Jordan, my name is Ross. I've struggled with depersonalization and derealization for about 2.5 years now. I think I might have somewhat of a unique situation." So the first thing I'll tell you is you probably don't. That's one thing whenever it comes to people who are dealing with trauma and depersonalization, realization, and even anxiety sometimes, is they think that they're the only person in the world that are going through those symptoms, particularly once you get into trauma symptoms like depersonalization, realization, memory issues, time feeling distorted, stuff like that. Because there's less awareness about these symptoms, people have a greater tendency to assume that they're the only ones experiencing them. It's a lot harder to find valid information online about them, and our society knows a lot more about generalized anxiety and panic attacks, but when it comes to trauma symptoms, there is a kind of trauma-informed movement that's happening, but at the time, especially with these types of symptoms, there's not enough information, and a lot of people don't even know what terms to use. And so because of that, people think that they are a unique case. Now, there definitely are unique cases out there. I'm not saying that there are not, but more often than not, people simply think that there's some unique case, and then whenever I hear their situation, I'm like, I'm not saying it's not severe, but it's a pretty standard case as far as what I deal with whenever I'm helping people. So that's the first thing that I'll say, is I don't think that it's probably going to be a unique situation, but it could be. So you said, I've actually went through this in my past when I was in the 8th grade. I don't really remember how long it lasted or how I got over it, but I didn't know what it was or what it was called, and eventually it went away. Okay, so I want to speak to this for a second. This happens all the time, and sometimes ignorance is bliss. Sometimes what elongates, like at least one of the layers that elongates depersonalization, realization, or other trauma symptoms, which are caused by a state of nervous system overwhelm, is people's obsession with the symptoms. And sometimes whenever you just don't really know what the heck is going on, that means that you're better able to emulate other mammals, non-human mammals, who don't stay stuck in fight, flight, freeze response, because they don't have the ability to overthink their symptoms. That's one of the reasons why non-human mammals don't stay stuck in fight, flight, freeze response. They don't experience depersonalization, realization, for example, and they're like let's say a gazelle or something, and the gazelle's like looking down at its, I was gonna say paws. I don't think gazelles have paws. It's hooves or whatever, and is like, "What's going on, mate?" I guess it's an Australian impala, or what did I say, gazelle? An Australian gazelle. I don't even know if they have gazelles in Australia. This is getting real bad. But anyway, it's like, "What's going on, mate? Why do I feel disconnected from these? Just the other day, I was strolling through the field, mate, and then all of a sudden, I don't feel like these hooves are my own, mate." No, but they don't have the ability to overthink their symptoms. That becomes one of the layers to the stress onion that keeps people in a state of overwhelm, is that they're sitting and they're obsessing over the symptoms. That's what I did. I literally would spend hours and hours a day, most of my day, like, what the heck is this? Why is this here? How do I get rid of this? And trying to understand and get rid of my depersonalization, realization became a full-time job. And I've been doing this for 6 years now, helping depersonalization, realization, trauma, anxiety sufferers. And my clients with severe DPDR, they've usually made a part or full-time job out of trying to understand and get rid of the symptoms. And it's typically people that are more creative, or people that are very deep thinkers. And so they have a harder time of letting go of symptoms that are so uncomfortable and terrifying and allegorical, right? Whenever you feel detached from your body or the world feels fake and dreamlike, like if you're a very deep thinker, if you are a very creative thinker, your mind just doesn't want to let go of those symptoms. And so it actually ends up creating yet another layer of stress that is keeping you in a state of traumatic stress, overwhelming stress. That is why the symptoms are there to begin with. With that being said, I hear this all the time where somebody will experience the symptoms initially and they didn't even really know what they were. They didn't even really try anything specific. They just moved on with their life. And at that time, that was enough for them to get over the symptoms. But here's what people don't understand is just because something worked to get you out of the symptoms in times past doesn't mean that it's going to work now. And a lot of times, this was several months or several years ago, I tell people, like, your nervous system is different now than it was a year ago. You've been through more experiences, particularly painful experiences that have created more sensory triggers. And so, people will say like, yeah, 3 years ago, I just basically accepted my symptoms or distracted away from them and everything just went away. Or I just didn't even try to overcome them and I just moved on with my life. Why isn't it working now? And I'm like, well, maybe at the time that was enough. That's all you had to do because there wasn't as much fatigue and stress in your body. But now that we're, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years later, or maybe even 10 years later for some people, where the symptoms have come back, you've got a whole different nervous system in terms of the amount of sensory triggers that you have at this point because of your painful history. You've been through painful experiences, and whenever you went through those painful experiences, it formed sensory triggers, and those sensory triggers started to fire fight or flight response in your body over and over again, and eventually it built up, and you hit the freeze response, which is due to a state of nervous system overwhelm, right? This would be more like complex trauma, where it's not a sudden state of overwhelm, which is called a major trauma. It's like a lightning strike. It's the slow buildup of stress over time. Think of it like a cup filling up with water, and then you hit that overwhelm point and you enter a trauma state. But nonetheless, this is also my story because originally I was having like 20 panic attacks a day. I'd had a really bad marijuana experience, and that's what initially caused depersonalization realization to show up for me, as well as panic, and had anxiety before, but I was having like extreme anxiety now, and time felt distorted. Loved ones felt like strangers. I thought I was literally going crazy. I thought I was losing my mind. Eventually, I came across some acceptance techniques. I just started to invite everything in instead of resist it. And for the time being, that made my panic attacks go away. That made my derealization go away. And looking back, I was still pretty anxious, but I wasn't like freaking out anxious all the time. And so I thought, I'm cured. Everything's good. But little did I know that because I didn't learn how to be interoceptive, right? Interoception is the experience of the embodied self. I didn't know how to listen to my body, and I didn't learn how to self-regulate, which is keep myself in a regulated nervous system and body. I ended up going through a lot of painful experiences, and years later, the symptoms came back with full vengeance. And even the symptoms would still happen, like with depersonalization, realization, a few other trauma symptoms, they would actually still happen like every maybe 6 or 7 months, but it would be just for a few seconds. And so I was thinking like, oh, I can deal with that. That's no big deal. Like as long as it's only in like extreme situations for a few seconds, no big deal, right? And yet, because I wasn't self-regulating, because I wasn't listening to my body, because I didn't have boundaries with people, I didn't have boundaries with life, and also because I didn't have a true scientific understanding of what was going on, everything just started to build up again. And eventually the symptoms came back, and I tried my acceptance techniques, and they didn't work this time. And I had not touched marijuana in several years, so I knew it wasn't because of the weed this time. And remember, at this time, I had no understanding of complex trauma, no understanding of anything. And I was absolutely terrified because I was like, this worked last time. Why is it not working this time? And then I came across distraction, which told me that if I just distract my mind 24/7 and do some other things as well, then this will make this go away. And the person teaching that, they meant well. They really, really meant well. But for me, there was so much buildup in my nervous system and my body that I couldn't distract away from it. The fatigue, the stress, the emotion was too severe at that point. And even if I did distract away and feel relief from that, I wouldn't have been dealing with the root issue anyway. So I'm kind of glad that there was too much buildup for that to work, because it forced me to eventually start to deal with the buildup in my body. But anyway, I just want to let you know, Ross, and anybody else who's dealing with the symptoms continually coming back over and over and over again, the reason why they keep coming back is because the root issue is not being dealt with, right? There's not interoception and self-regulation and boundaries, and especially co-regulation for you to really learn how to self-regulate in order to get out of this. It's often said that co-regulation, which is being around somebody that makes you feel safe and calm, can build hope in you, build relationship, and help teach you how to self-regulate, that precedes self-regulation. Co-regulation precedes self-regulation. People heal people, right? That's a big reason why I'm able to help people. It's not because I'm doing anything magical or fancy. It's because people relate with what I've gone through, and they hear my story, and they hear the way that I describe things, and then they hear that I've gotten out of this, and then I help people get out of this as well all the time, and they're like, oh my gosh, there is hope. With that being said, it's terrifying when the symptoms come back, but it's simply a sign that the root issue is not being dealt with, right? And if you don't even know why the symptoms went away to begin with, that should be your first sign that the root was never actually dealt with. That's like being in a relationship, and let's say you're fighting all the time, and all of a sudden you stop fighting, and you don't even really know what stopped the fighting, but you're just so happy that the fighting has stopped that you're like, oh, well, I guess, everything's good now. And then all of a sudden you start fighting again a year later, 6 months later. Well, why are you fighting now? Well, it's because you never really dealt with those root issues that caused the fights to begin with. Or let's say that you know what the issues were, but you just buried them. You're like, we're just not going to talk about that. Is that really dealing with the issue? No, it's not, right? And that's what people do with their nervous system and their body. They're just like, okay, as long as I can just make it through the day, as long as I'm fine right now, that's all that matters. And they're usually doing symptom management techniques. And I don't teach symptom management techniques. You will never, ever, ever, ever hear me with my clients or even in these videos talking about symptom management, because I don't believe that we have to settle for symptom management. Like, I'm not waking up every day and managing my symptoms. I have no symptoms, and it's because I fought and I paid the price to get into a regulated nervous system, right? It took time to build interoception. It took time to befriend the body. I had terrible health anxiety. I thought my heart was going to stop all the time. I had very toxic and even abusive people in my life. A few were people with NPD, narcissistic personality disorder. I had to start prioritizing sleep and nutrition, and I had to listen to my body. I had to have boundaries in life. I had to get a scientific understanding of what was going on. It took some work, but the payoff is that I can now enjoy my life. I can now be in the present moment with my family. I can just be in the present moment in general. Like, I can wake up and actually choose the life that I want to live instead of the symptoms choosing the life that I live. That's the most frustrating part about symptoms, is they control your life. They dictate what you're able to do and not do. And now I'm free. And that's what I help my clients do, is I help them get free so they can move the hell on and enjoy their life again. And you can have it too, but as I say, there's the 80-20 rule, and I've accepted this. 80% of people will never put in the work to truly, truly get into a regulated nervous system. And I stopped trying to wrestle with those people years ago. I love you, but if I see that you're not ready, I'm like, that's okay. That's, some people, they haven't suffered enough. I'm looking for those people, as far as working together, that they have suffered enough, they're ready to put in the work. And if you're ready to put in the work, you would be amazed at how fast that you can start to see results. We got a lady who's working with us, and she said she's about to do a recovery interview with me. She literally was in her house for, I don't want to say longer than it was. It's at least 3 months. I want to say 6 months, where she barely even left her house. And then after working with me for, I think, like within 2 or 3 months, she was already going on a trip to Europe. And she said she walked like, I don't even know, like hundreds of thousands of steps within several weeks or whatever. But She's literally almost completely symptom free, and I think it's been about 4 months now. Like such severe symptoms, couldn't even leave her house. Now she's out all the time. She's enjoying her life. This is one of so many stories that we see because people are willing to truly get to the root. So that's what I'll say. You said, I believe I may have beat it just by being involved in wrestling at my school and going in to high school, meeting new people and making friends. Yeah, exactly. So, and those things are great. Social connection is paramount for health and well-being, but you never really had a systematic approach in terms of interoception and self-regulation. It sounds like you might have got some social connection, which is great, and you started to focus on other things, but that can't replace interoception and self-regulation, right? And so eventually it all built up. You said, this time around, I've had a much harder time shaking the DPDR. Some of the symptoms I've dealt with is brain fog, dizziness, light sensitivity, feelings of being unreal, fear that I've developed psychosis, and fear of being in crowds and in public. So let me speak to that for a second. So notice how it's not just DPDR. Now, I do get clients that are just experiencing depersonalization, normalization, and sometimes it's just DP, sometimes it's just DR, sometimes it's both, and there's no other symptoms. But most of the time, there's going to be other symptoms as well. And some of those other symptoms could be trauma symptoms. Some of those other symptoms could be anxiety symptoms, technically fight or flight response. So here's what I'll tell you. Make sure to see a doctor, right? And especially if you had any sort of injury, especially if you hit your head or anything like that, like make sure you see a neurologist. If you're working with me, I'm assuming that you've seen a doctor and pursued the medical route to make sure that you're good medically. And if the doctor said something to the effect of like, hey, we can't find anything, like there's nothing medically wrong, and they'll say things like, hey, it's just anxiety. If they don't see anything medically going on, they've done all the tests, the scans, they'll usually be like, hey, go see a therapist. And at that point, it's usually safe to say, okay, this is natural. This is not something organic, not something medical. But anyway, yeah, brain fog or dizziness are extremely common symptoms of anxiety or trauma, right? Because whenever you're in a trauma state, particularly, there's a massive diminishing of functionality in the prefrontal cortex. That's logical, critical, creative, contextual thinking, attentional awareness. And it usually doesn't shut down completely, but there's significant diminished functionality in the prefrontal cortex. And so if that's the case, you're going to have a very difficult time focusing and concentrating. And you're going to experience that as brain fog. Like I remember I would go to recall information whenever I'm talking to people, and it would be so difficult to recall that information. I'd be like, it's almost as like a computer was lagging. I'd be like, okay, hold on a second. And also my memory, which I don't think he mentioned memory issues, but it felt like my whole history had been erased. I would literally sit for hours and hours just trying to remember stuff, and I couldn't do it. And I would forget what I did that day even, or the day before. My memory was the worst. And that's because in a trauma state, your memory transitions from registering as explicit narrative-based memory to implicit procedural memory. And so what that essentially translates into is you're not really going to be able to recall situations and have this kind of cohesive narrative of beginning, middle, and end. You're going to be able to remember maybe bits and pieces of it, or you may not be able to remember anything. So anyway, light sensitivity, extremely common as well. Whenever our body enters fight or flight response, our pupils dilate. And that's designed to let in as much of our surroundings as possible to increase the chances that we would survive if a lion was chasing us. But what that translates into is you're going to be a lot more sensitive to light. So looking at computer screens, your phone, especially if you get around fluorescent lights, which flash really, really fast, you can't tell, but they're flashing really fast. Feelings of being unreal, obviously depersonalization makes you feel unreal. Also, derealization can do that. The fear of psychosis. This is one of the number one fears that I dealt with, that my clients deal with, and it's really connected to permanence, right? Like if you look at actual psychosis, the average person, based upon the last time I looked at this, the average person that does deal with psychosis, it's just one episode, right, where they kind of fully break from reality. But it's really the fear of permanent symptoms is really what people are afraid of, right? They think psychosis and they think, okay, what if these symptoms represent that I'm psychotic now, I've lost my mind, and I'll never be able to feel normal again, right? Because usually, I mean, that fear isn't really contextual with most people's experience of psychosis, but that's just the most, familiar term that they latch onto. But it's really the fear of permanence, right? They're afraid that their brain is broken and that they'll never be able to get over this again. And if their brain is broken and they can't heal from this, that leads to overwhelm, and that's a trauma state. And so that fear of permanence becomes one of the layers of stress that keeps them in that state of overwhelm. And so that's why scientific education is so important. This is called cognitive restructuring. This is one of the first things that I do with my clients is I take them through some basic understanding of how stress and trauma happen and how their nervous system works. And this is really, really important for stripping away these fears, because once you see how your nervous system functions, you're like, oh, so that's why that symptom's happening? Oh, okay. So I'm not losing my mind? Oh, okay. Light sensitivity. Oh, that's because, my pupils are dilated because my body's trying to help me. Oh, wait, eye floaters. It turns out that they're always there. But whenever my pupils are dilated, I can just see them because there's more light coming into my retina. Learning about this stuff is really, really important. It's one of the layers of the onion that we have to peel in order to get you out of this, in order to downregulate your nervous system. Fear of being in crowds and in public, absolutely. This would be known as, kind of agoraphobia. And I used to experience sensory overload. And so there's just kind of too much incoming sensory data for my nervous system to handle. Too many visuals, too many sounds, too many smells, and it just kind of used to overwhelm my system. And whenever this happens, people will sometimes start to avoid social situations, which ironically only makes things worse, because whatever you avoid, your brain assumes is a lion trying to eat you. So you said, at this point in my struggle, I seem to have 2 good weeks, then 2 bad weeks, or 5 good days, then 1 bad week. I do believe I've gotten better, but I still certainly struggle. A big help has been that I've been in flight school pursuing a career 2.0 because I believe my life situation is a big cause of my issues. Okay, so notice there's this fluctuation in your nervous system, right? Where you're hitting overwhelm, and that's what's triggering the DPDR and other trauma symptoms. But it sounds like you're constantly walking around in at least fight or flight response or an anxious state. And the current approach is, let me just focus on something else, right? You're a good person and you're just trying to feel better. And I get that. And that's what worked last time, right? Back in the 8th grade, you just focused on wrestling. So you're thinking, hey, you know what? I'll just go to flight school. I'll, get around good people. But the missing piece here, Ross, is the body. Interoception, self-regulation, as well as proper scientific education, as well as co-regulation. Those are the 4 things that are essential to really rewire your nervous system. And these are the 4 things that I provide my clients with to make sure they get out of this. You said, I've watched your videos a lot, and I would say that they do help me. However, I feel like I need to speak with someone. I've tried talking to a therapist, and he really didn't understand my situation or really what DPDR is. So here's what I'll tell you. I'm currently working with 2 different licensed mental health professionals in my program, actually. One's a therapist, and I think the other is a psychologist or psychiatrist. But they're going through symptoms themselves, and they're wonderful people. I love working with licensed mental health professionals because they've usually got a baseline understanding of what's going on. They usually have some great self-regulation tools. They just need a lot of co-regulation and then some more specific self-regulation skills, and they need a little bit deeper understanding, believe it or not. But, I want to say I love licensed mental health professionals. In fact, I've got a heart to help them, and I love it whenever they come into my program. I can usually help them a lot faster than other people, actually, because they've already got such a good foundation, and they're really hungry for help because, their practice is struggling. Right? Like they're showing up to help anxiety sufferers or trauma sufferers or people with depression or whatever they're going through. And because their body and nervous system is so overwhelmed, they're especially vulnerable to compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is a form of secondary trauma where you end up being stressed or even traumatized because of hearing stories of people going through things or them sharing their problems with you over and over and over again, day in and day out. It can happen to teachers, therapists, nurses, doctors, anybody in the care field. can be especially vulnerable to that. And so, with that being said, as much as I love therapists and licensed mental health professionals, and I believe that they can literally get so much help and be such a powerhouse when it comes to mental health if they get the right help, a lot of times they don't get the right training. And most people assume, okay, well, they have their license in mental health. Like, surely they are the most equipped to help with anything related to mental health. But what I've found is there's a lot of therapists or licensed mental health professionals. They may be really good for a lot of things except for trauma, right? And most of them, based upon what I've seen, have more of like a 20th century understanding of trauma versus a 21st century understanding of trauma. So what that looks like is, you may go into a clinic where there's a therapist, and you'll tell them about your depersonalization, realization, time feels distorted, memory issues, all these trauma symptoms, and then they're going to be looking in the DSM-5, and they're going to be looking at trauma as an event, and they're going to ask, have you been through a car accident recently, lost a loved one, natural disaster, going off to war, things like that. And if you haven't been through those things, a lot of times people they don't get acknowledged that they're going through trauma because their symptoms are not connected to a specific event on that list. And so there's a lot of people dealing with trauma symptoms that the licensed mental health professional tries to help with something that's not effective enough to really help with trauma. Particularly, it lacks a somatic approach. It's not really focused on the body. I hope this video encouraged you, helped spread some hope. And if you would like to take my free 5 shifts masterclass that will show you the 5 shifts to eliminate depersonalization, realization, anxiety, panic, as well as many other symptoms related to a dysregulated nervous system, there's a link below. You can check that out. If this helped you, if you want to click that like button to help kind of spread some awareness and convey to the YouTube algorithm that this video helps people, make sure to do that. And also comment something below if you'd like to share how you were helped by the video, or if you had a question or something like that. I'll do my best to get to it. That is it, and I hope you have an awesome day. Take care.